Last night, like I was so uninspired by everything that happened last night. I was so aggravated by the play calling, Matt Nagy's like, bitch, I understand like the calls weren't great, but it was just frustrating all the way across. Like I don't know. What were your thoughts on last night's game?
Well, I tweeted out, I said people went in and watched a game between Matt Nagy and Mike Zimmer, and they took to Twitter. They're like, I can't believe how bad this coaching is. It's like, you know what? I think you get what you pay for. And frankly, I put this at the feet of ESPN. Why are Matt Nagy and Mike Zimmer being broadcast to us on national television? They're a complete disgrace. Matt Nagy is atrocious. My absolute favorite Zimmer moment of last night was on 2nd and 12. They threw a 7-yard completion to KJ Osborne to make it 3rd and 5. Then it's offside on the Bears. So he accepts the 5-yard penalty to go to 2nd and 7, and then immediately calls a run up the center's ass for 2 yards to make it 3rd and 5 once again. It's just my absolute favorite Zimmer moment. And Nagy, of course, is a complete lunatic. The first game was more fun, and the Browns were basically playing with a bunch of preseason dudes.
Yeah, they really were, and it was somewhat competitive the majority of the game. And Nick Mullins looked somewhat better than Baker Mayfield did, to be honest.
Well, that's not shocking.
No, it's not. But like, oh man, if DPJ would have came down with one of those 3 balls that were broken up, like we could be talking about a completely different game. And me still in some of my best ball, tournaments as well.
Oh man, the Vikings killed me in that. It was a rough Sunday for best ball regard. We'll see where it ends up. But I was like, you know what? End of the day, it's not that bad. I'm way overweight on all the Vikings. Like I have tons of Cousins, Jefferson, Cook, and then I have tons of Eagles and I have tons of Rams. So I'm like, we can make this back. And the Vikings just absolutely laid an egg. So they were totally unusable. We'll see. I'm praying that Hurts and Smith can do some magic for me because I have a lot of cup, but so does everybody else. So it doesn't really do a whole lot for me in best ball.
Dude, let's on that note, let's go ahead and break into this episode. We're going to do the normal intro, but Shane isn't going to be in here, unfortunately.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Intervene with your fantasy life, Shane Manila, Jakob Sanderson, and Chase Vernon.
Oh man, welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. We got our DFS shows back, and these are some of my favorite shows to participate in. I am joined by Jakob Sanderson. What's going on, Jacob? How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Except apparently we talked about this pre-show. We tried to get it set out. Apparently I might lag. I might be a little bit pixelated. We'll see how this goes. But the Wi-Fi is not our friend, but we will try to be your friend getting through this DFS slate. It's fun, man. 2-game slate. I think there's a lot of interesting decisions. Actually, I think more interesting. I didn't play last night's slate, but I looked at it briefly and I was like, man, I don't want to fucking do this. I think this week's slate is actually much more interesting, and I'm excited to break it all down. It's our first trial run of a Tuesday DFS show we're gonna be doing for the next few weeks, and definitely the only one. Well, maybe not at this rate, but the first one that has immediate pre-game implications.
Yeah, and trying to break this one down, like you brought up last night's DFS slate, I was not having fun trying to put together lineups for Monday night's DFS slate. Like it wasn't, there was nothing in there. I was like, oh man, I feel great about this. I feel great about this. And as I started to break down this one, I started to feel somewhat of the same way because I like to look for explosive plays. I like to look for, big time, game breakers where you could see running back, hightail it for like 60 yards on multiple occasions, a wide receiver who could end up breaking a safety's ankles in the secondary. And you see that Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson type thing. And so I was diving into it. And on the defensive side of things, neither matchup on either side all these teams are not allowing big plays thus far in the season, whether it's to the running game or to the passing game. Now, they've had weeks like week 10, I think both the Rams and the Seahawks allowed a ton of big plays. But when it comes to consistency wise, ever since week 6 in Washington and Philadelphia was like week 4, somewhere along those lines, neither team has given up that many weeks of big plays to the point where it's like, oh man, where are you going to target? Where are you going to find these game breakers? Where do I want my stacks? And at first we thought it was going to be Washington. It was going to be the Eagles, and Washington was, going to struggle with everybody out on COVID. However, that's not the case anymore. We have almost everybody back from COVID outside of like the quarterback position. We have Brandon Scherf, who's their best lineman. We talked about that yesterday. There's a few players here that have opportunities. Or I'm sorry, there are a few players here where we thought there were going to be opportunities for the Eagles. It might not be an opportunity moving forward for them to actually perform at a high level. With that being said, where do you find the chalk this week? Like, where do you think the heaviest chalk is going to go in terms of stacks? Like, when we start to build our lineups, we typically start with stacks. Where do you think the chalk is going to be?
Yeah, so I think we're going to see pretty similar ownership on Stafford and on Hurts. And then, a nice decline from those two down to Russell Wilson. And then, of course, Garrett Gilbert bringing up the rear. But I think that Hurts is probably the guy I'll have the least of. I'll be honest, I'm only playing 5 lineups. Right now, I'm planning to do 4 of the 5 being focused on stacks for the Seattle-LA game, 2 of Stafford and 2 of Russell Wilson. And a lot of it is what you're saying. I think that we went from an early week narrative, which was that Philly would be able to do whatever they wanted to Washington based on how much they've been eviscerated by injuries. And now it's changed really, where their defense has kind of come back to health. But of course, their offense is piloted by Garrett Gilbert. So I don't expect Washington to do much on offense, but I don't know that Seattle is going to be overly explosive. And we know that Seattle with Hurts, since about the midpoint of the season, is more than willing to just run the ball repeatedly and run it with like 3 different running backs plus their quarterback. And so if we get into this game where Washington can't make plays happen on offense, Philly is just running the ball nonstop. Like, you could easily see this game turning into one of the games we had last night where there's just not a lot of fantasy value there. And then you're hoping to find more value in the other game. So I would say if Hurts and Stafford are indeed going to be similarly owned, I'm significantly more into the Stafford side, especially because he has so many more fun options that he shares his fantasy points with, versus Hurts' ceiling game is usually his 2 rushing touchdowns.
And I mean, after last week, we saw the Seahawks, they were able to put up points. I believe that was last week. Sitting there and looking at the possible competition for, moving forward, we could actually see a little bit more offensively competitive game than what we see over there for the other team. However, I know that you brought up the whole Stafford thing. I do want to go there, obviously, to these games, but I want to start out with the Washington and Eagles side. And I believe that it is going to be chalky, and it's probably going to be chalky when you sit there and you talk about, Devonta Smith with Jalen Hurts. I think that's going to be probably the top, own 2 players when it comes to that, and then probably running it back with Antonio Gibson. Do you see another player that they're going to throw in here as what would you consider chalk in this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like it's a 2-game slate, so everyone's going to be owned. Anyone who has a legitimate role is going to have ownership. I would expect Goddard to have the most ownership of any of the Philly guys, just based on the dearth of other tight end availability. I mean, the Rams have basically no tight end. They're going to be rolling with Kendall Blanton, I think, who has really only just been a blocking tight end. They ran plays on the Monday night game without Higbee in 10 personnel, like a pretty good amount of the time. So they were running without even a tight end on the field. Now you're hearing talk of that they want to run 2 running back sets. Jordan Rodriguez, the beat reporter for the Rams, said that they want to integrate 2 running back sets. So you'd expect to see some sets with 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, no tight end. Basically, that means that we have essentially 3 teams that play a tight end on the slate. And that leaves Goddard, Gerald Everett, and then the Washington guys where Ricky Seals-Jones is active. And so I think there's some uncertainty between him and between Bates. So especially with a lot of salary you can use, I think Goddard's the most. I think Smith will get some. I think he'll be, clearly behind Kupp and Metcalf at wide receiver. I could easily see him being the 3rd most owned wide receiver, though, because otherwise people are going to have to decide between Van or Odell. And I could definitely see people playing Smith, and especially if you're playing Hurts and you want to double stack them. I mean, it's pretty clearly Smith Goddard that's your priority.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to bring up too. I believe all 4 running backs for the Philadelphia Eagles are actually active tonight. So
Fun with that.
Great. I'm very excited for that one, trying to figure out how to navigate those murky waters. So, with that being said, I'm somebody that I do want to target Goddard in this matchup. I'll eat the chalk on Goddard for the most part. I don't mind eating the chalk on Bates either, to be honest with you, which we can hit on in a second here.
I don't even think he's going to be chalk. I think more people are going to play Ricky Seals-Jones, to be honest. And I think Bates is the play.
Yes, yeah. And I think that Bates will be the smaller side, which, like I said, we'll get into here in a second. But as for the stacks that I want to build around Hurts, this is something where I actually do want to target it in hopes that people will stack Hurts with Devonta Smith. Because I don't think Devonta Smith is going to have a good game. I think that William Jackson is going to be locked on. We have Kendall Fuller, who is out for this game due to COVID. And we're going to see William Jackson pretty much shadow Devonta Smith around the field. Devonta Smith doesn't travel to the slot, neither does William Jackson. So we're going to see a ton of that coverage over there. I don't see Washington playing a ton of zone up against Devonta Smith and the rest of this Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think they're going to dare, Rager to beat him deep. They're going to dare Jalen Hurts to be accurate downfield. And, we could end up seeing targets just stripped away from Devonta Smith because he won't be open. However, in the slot position, Washington has actually allowed significant amount of points to the slot after Kendall Fuller moved to the outside earlier in the season after Benjamin St. Judice got hurt. So with that being said, that's Quez Watkins, that's Dallas Goedert, that's that whole entire area. And for this entire slate, I talked about at the beginning of the show, how although these offenses are explosive, the defenses have not allowed big plays. So for this entire slate, I want to target PPR guys. I want to target heavy volume. I don't want to go after these guys who could end up having 2 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown, because I don't know if that exists this week. So I would much rather put a lot more of my stacking, or the core to my builds, I should say, onto relying on volume, like pure volume over and over and over again. I think that's Quez Watkins this week, and I think that's Dallas Goedert. So going with the Hurts, Goddard, Watkins stack is where I'm starting a lot of my lineups.
Yeah, I don't mind that. I think with Hurts is a tough one because, his ceiling outcome, unlike Stafford, like I was saying, is more tied to his rushing ability than his passing ability, especially of late. So, even if we do get, let's say Hurts is the highest scoring quarterback on the slate, how does that happen? Probably it comes with 80 yards rushing, 150 yards passing, 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 passing touchdown. Right. So maybe one guy gets there, maybe Goddard gets there, maybe Smith does get there, but I find it very unlikely that both Goddard and Smith together end up in the optimal lineup, especially because I don't think that they're going to be forced to pass because Garrett Gilbert sucks. So I agree. If you do want to double stack Hurts, I think that it makes at least a little bit more sense to throw Quez in there as your secondary. He's clearly ahead of Rager now. He's been playing more snaps. Maybe with him spending time on the COVID list this week, maybe that shifts back to Rager. I just frankly don't want to play Rager. He's been so inefficient when he does get his opportunities. He's just terrible at football. So I think with Hurts, I'm either going to single stack him with only one of Goddard or Smith, or I would play him with one of those two. And if I need to double stack, go to Quez Watkins, who, at 3,700, he can catch 2 balls for 50 yards and potentially be in the optimal lineup. Right? That's a possibility with Quez Watkins. Whereas if you play Smith and Goddard, it all depends what happens in the other game. But realistically, you probably need 50 plus yards out of both and, maybe a touchdown out of both. And that's just, I think, a tough ask with the way that Hurts and Philly has been playing lately.
Also, the game speed run by Washington is extremely slow. They like to run the ball.
God,
they like to try and...
These are 2 of the slowest teams in the world. This game sucks.
Yeah, it's brutal, so I can understand fading off this. However, if I want to build my core lineups, I'm going to start with Jalen Hurts with either Quez Watkins or Dallas Goedert, or both of them if I want to take a little bit of a risky shot, thinking that the Seattle Seahawks and Rams game could be a little bit lower scoring. So let's hop over to the Washington side, because you did bring up Garrett Gilbert. And, Terry McLaurin, right? His name's up there, but he's expensive. And trying to find lineups that you can squeeze him into with some of the more expensive guys in the slate is not easy. Meanwhile, he hasn't been productive. Last week he goes out, has 4 targets, 0 receptions, Taylor Heineke almost gets his head knocked off when he ends up hitting the turf, gives him a concussion. Meanwhile, we have Cam Sims guys coming in saying that Cam Sims is the guy after he made his Megatron-esque catch last week. We have Adam Humphries, who's led the team in routes run, I believe, over the past 2 weeks. And I think receptions as well. I think he has 10 receptions over the past 2 or 3 weeks. He's been that guy. And then you have DeAndre Carter, who is somewhat relevant from time to time, but he's somewhat of an easier matchup as Darius Slay will likely be following Terry McLaurin around the field. So, with this offense, it's tough to actually see where to find value with this. And I think Terry McLaurin is actually contrarian play for this slate. What do you think about Terry McLaurin? We'll start there.
Yeah, I totally agree that he's a contrarian play. I would be quite surprised if his ownership is in the top 5 wide receivers. Like Kupp and Metcalf are going to be borderline lock buttons, especially Kupp. And I would be quite surprised if you see McLaurin's ownership get past either of the Rams guys, OBJ and Van Jefferson. Maybe it does, but I kind of doubt it. I think both those guys project better and they're much cheaper. And I would be really shocked if he gets ahead of Smith. So, at 6,500, that's the other thing. To me, if I'm playing McLaurin, I think it's a decent enough leverage play off of Gibson because Gibson will be, I think, like by an absolute mile, the most popular running back play on the slate. I think he'll be in like 80% of lineups. And so if you want to not play Gibson, there's really no running back you can leverage him with, right? It's not like, in the old, normally you'd be able to say, okay, I'll fade Gibson by playing McKissick, but there's really no other running back there. I think that the way to do it is with McLaurin because, maybe Washington gets way behind early. That's easy to envision. So Gibson gets taken out of the running game and McLaurin becomes the focal point of the passing game. And, maybe you end up with like a 9 to 10 point Gibson day and McLaurin's able to catch 60, 70 yards at a touchdown. That's probably enough to get him in the optimal lineup on a 2-game slate. So I think McLaurin is a fine play from a game theory perspective. I think he's a very bad play from I think he'll pay off 6,500 perspective because he could easily have like catches for 10 yards.
Yeah, I mean, and it's tough because if Washington does go down early, the Eagles are 3rd in the league in the dump-off containment efficiency score. It's the DOSE score. You guys can find over there at fantasyintervention.com/DOCE. Philadelphia has actually played the 3rd or 4th highest, I think it's the 4th hardest schedule up against pass-catching running backs. I mean, they faced 23 of them, but their score overall is a 27.9, so they face very, very good pass-catching running backs. Meanwhile, they're giving about 8.6 points per game to pass-catching running backs. But they've allowed a ton of targets. They have not allowed a ton of receptions. And Antonio Gibson can turn receptions into efficiency, but overall, he doesn't see a ton of targets. And up against a very good team at containing the running back, I don't think that Antonio Gibson is a player that I'm going to be running a ton out of this upcoming week, especially at his price, when you can kind of pivot off and still get a portion of what he's going to do in the passing game, or the receiving game, I should say, from possibly like a Miles Sanders, right? Sonny Michel or Darrell Henderson, we'll talk about here in a little bit. So I'm actually going to be fading Gibson, and I'd like somewhat sneaking Terry McLaurin into my lineups where I want a contrarian play. Maybe I go all chalk and I have some extra cash to be able to play, one of these less played, more expensive guys. That's probably the guy that I'm going to on this slate. But overall, I'm not somebody that wants to focus on, build my lineups around Antonio Gibson or Terry McLaurin for that matter. Now, it's like, all right, so if Washington's going to keep up, who do they go to? And honestly, Garrett Gilbert in his one start in his NFL career up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They would play the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it was like week 8 or 9. I believe it was the Steelers' 8th straight win of the season. They won 21 to like 17 or something like that. But Garrett Gilbert actually played okay in that game. He didn't play great. I think he got CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper over 60 yards receiving or 50 yards receiving. He had another receiver that was right there with them. However, he'd never targeted his running backs. Right? I think they had a total of 5 targets between Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. So with that being said, once again, another argument against Antonio Gibson. But John Bates is somebody that I would think about rolling out him. Adam Humphries, if I want volume, although that's not a sexy play at all, and I really want nothing to do with it. But John Bates is cheap enough, and like you brought up, I mean, ownership on Dallas Goedert should be through the absolute roof this week, as there's really no other guys to target. But if you want to go out and you want to play like DK Metcalf and Cooper Kupp, I mean, John Bates is kind of a good guy to fall back on, considering the fact that he's listed as the starter in this offense. He's seen a few targets. Garrett Gilbert, we don't know really what to expect from him, but still, if he can get into the red zone, they're facing, a 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 6, maybe 10 yards to go. I mean, John Bates could easily sneak into the end zone on 1, maybe 2 targets this game. So what's your feeling about John Bates? What's your thought about Ricky Seals-Jones? Because I'm not on Ricky Seals-Jones at all. Run me through that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to say because Ricky came back from came back from that injury and he was eased in. I expected that we would see what we always see with Washington, it seems, which is that if you're the Washington tight end, you are the Washington tight end and you play 100% of the snaps and you get a 20% target share. And that didn't happen last week. We saw more 12 personnel used by the Washington football team last week than we've seen for most of the season. And John Bates was their 11 personnel tight end primarily. And then they brought in Ricky Seals-Jones to essentially play more of a wide receiver role in 2 tight end sets. Is that because they were easing him in back off injury? Or is that because, that was just what they wanted to do that game and that's what they'll do going forward? I really can't say, but I do think Bates will be less owned and he's less expensive. Not that price really matters on this slate, but to me, I would probably go with Bates. Also, a big reason why is just because if you think on this slate, like how many touchdowns and how many yards, do you really expect Washington to put up with Garrett Gilbert? Not that much, right? So I think if you're playing a Washington tight end, you're kind of hoping they find the end zone. And with Bates's role, he's going to be that blocking tight end. And if you think about how a lot of tight end touchdowns get scored, you open up in the heavy personnel on the 2-yard line, do the fake to the running back, roll out, find the tight end. That's Bates, right? He's the one that's going to be blocking. He's going to be running that little leak out route in the end zone. And, if you get one of those, that's all you need, right? Let's say Bates has 2 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown. That's 10 points. That could be enough to be the highest scoring tight end on the slate quite plausibly. So I like Bates a little bit more than Seals-Jones because I think he has a little more touchdown equity, and it seems like he's going to be playing more snaps. I could be wrong on that, but mostly that's just based on, I think if Bates is less owned, and he's less money, and he's going to play more snaps, give me that.
Well, all right. So here's the deal, with Bates, right? Bates actually does play, or he ran more routes, higher route percentage than Ricky Seals-Jones last week, and that might not continue moving forward, but John Bates is playing as a wide receiver, just like Ricky Seals-Jones. In fact, neither one of them played more than 10 snaps as an inline tight end. They were both playing the slot. They were both playing out wide. I mean, it was kind of crazy, both their utilization, because like you said, it's 12 personnel, but it really wasn't 12 personnel. They were trying to capitalize off the mismatches over there and also trying to get the running back outside a little bit more often than what they've done in the past. It was also pulling the linebackers and safeties out of the middle whenever they did that. So, with that being said, I think that John Bates is somebody that you got to target. I know he only saw 2 targets on 27 routes run last week. And meanwhile, Ricky Seals-Jones saw 4 targets on 17 routes run, although he only came up with 1 reception. So I still think that I'm leaning more towards John Bates for ownership purposes, which could capitalize, on a touchdown or 2, like you brought up. And that's what you want from a tight end in DFS that is, has that lower cost. You just need a touchdown for them to pay off. 1 catch, 1 yard touchdown. You're talking about, now, getting your ROI. So let's hop over to the other side of the ball, because I see we do have questions from Ronnie over there. He's asked about Michelle or Henderson. And this one's a little bit tougher for me because, real quick, let me revisit. No, actually, I'll save the next one. I'll save the last one for our flyer plays. Yeah, back over to the Rams, right? As we sit there and we look at the usage in the receiving game, everybody's like, oh, Sonny Michel will end up getting utilized as the first, second down back. We'll see Darrell Henderson as the slasher and the third down back. And, he could see some receptions and yada, yada. It's hey, listen, Darrell Henderson is fine with the ball in his hands, but he's really not a pass catching running back.
No,
I don't know. He's seen I think a max of 4 targets per game for 2 reasons. One is ever since Todd Gurley, the Rams don't like to pass the running back anymore. They just don't do it. They pass the ball downfield. If they want to use their running back in the passing game, they use Cooper Kupp in the slot because they realize, hey, he's already 2 yards downfield, so we don't have to make up for 3 or 4 yards as defenders climb in. Meanwhile, he's going to be more open than our running backs are anyways. So that's their pass catching running back is Cooper Kupp. When we try and hope for a big time play up against the Seahawks have only allowed an explosive play rate of 7% to pass or to running backs as a whole. Like, we're not seeing them have explosive plays. So to hope for Darrell Henderson to break off a big one, I'm not saying it can't happen, because it can happen, but to sit there and hope for it to happen, I think is a little bit, almost like asinine to an extent. Meanwhile, you can see the volume out of Sony Michel. However, I will bring up that the Seahawks are so bad up against pass catching running backs.
Terrible.
The score, Dose score has him at the league worst, 8.33 Dose score allowed, dump off containment efficiency score allowed. Meanwhile, they're giving up 15.2 points to the pass catcher running back this year. And the crazy part is, I told you, like, the pass catcher running back score, right? For the Eagles, it's 27.9. The pass back score for the Seattle Seahawks is a 23.8. So it's not even relatively close. Like, these Seahawks are so bad at pass catching running backs.
Quite
so if there was any hope at all, it would be a dump off to Darrell Henderson for a touchdown. I don't know if Sony Michel can offer that upside. However, when we talk about getting close to the goal line, this is where Sony Michel could see some opportunities with them not having a touchdown. So I kind of like Sony Michel as a receiving back, where you think he's going to be pass blocking, wherever the case is, as a guy who would actually get in the touchdown in the air, and somebody you could possibly stack with Matt Stafford to get away from the chalk. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I like Sony a lot. Now, I think that's the most interesting ownership inflection point, is just which one's more owned. Because, I don't think anyone for sure knows how these guys are going to get utilized. But what I'm seeing from what I've looked at across the industry is that Henderson's projecting higher. And I disagree. My inclination is that it'll be Sony that gets more of the work. So I would rather play him straight up. And if it ends up being the case that he also gets less ownership, then I'm even more bullish on Sony. If I'm wrong and I flip over the cards and Sony has twice the ownership of Henderson, then I'll wish that I played Henderson. But from what I read, and I've been minding these Rams beat reports, it's that they want to be able to use both. They've talked about these two running back committees. They talked about using Sony more on the ground, Henderson more through the air, like you mentioned. But people shouldn't forget exactly, what the Rams have done historically. And the Rams are not a running back by committee team in the sense that they aren't by role delineation. They do not like, other than a little bit of time last year where they just didn't have running backs healthy, they didn't have guys they could trust. They really don't like to be the kind of team that subs in the pass down back and then takes them out and then puts in the early down back. It doesn't allow them to run tempo, and it ends up disclosing their tendencies to the defense. If you look at their personnel over the years since McVay's been there, they use the least amount of players on offense of anyone in the league. I mean, they run games where all three wide receivers play 100% of the snaps, and the one tight end plays 100% of the snaps, and they just play the entire game in 11 personnel, right? So what I think we're going to see most likely is if they do use both, maybe we do see some of that, what would it even be, 20 personnel? 02 personnel, whatever that is, where they have a no tight end, two backs. And then I think we'll see drives, where it's like, okay, this is the Sony drive, this is the Henderson drive, and whatever the plan is, it could change, right? Like, what if they give Michel the first drive and they give Henderson the second drive, and Henderson looks better than Michel, or Michel looks better than Henderson? Like, whoever looks better might play in the second half. What? So
they can do it by quarters. We've seen them do it by quarters before, where they sub their running backs by quarter. It's absurd, but I love it. Like, not for my purposes, but from an NFL perspective, because I think it's intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely they do things that I think it's smart, right? And they want backs that can operate in all phases. Both these running backs, I think, can. They both operated as the workhorse this year at points. So I just want the one that's less owned, and ideally, I want that to be Michel. It seems like that will be Michel. So that's where I'm leaning. But I also think you can play both running backs the same lineup. I'm going to do that in a couple spots. So, for instance, if I'm playing a Hurts stack, I like the idea of playing a Hurts stack with both the Rams running backs, because essentially that's saying, okay, Seattle's so bad against these pass catching running backs, right? That you can see these running backs really juice their stats the pass game. That might end up taking away points from Cobb and Odell and from Van. And then let's say that the Rams score, 4 touchdowns and 3 of them go to the running backs. That's totally plausible. 1 receiving, 1 rushing each. Like, both of them going to get in the optimal lineup. And then that basically means Stafford and his receivers now are a little bit up a creek. So if I'm playing a Hurts stack, that's sort of one of the ways where I just mute that entire game, because if Michel and Henderson are both in the optimal lineup, that means Seattle probably didn't have the ball much this game. And that means that Stafford probably isn't the highest scoring quarterback on the slate. And that means that Hurts probably is the highest scoring quarterback on the slate. So I would go with like something like a Hurts and then pick one of his pass catchers, fill out the rest, play both those Rams running backs, and figure it out from there. That's something I'm going to be looking to do this game.
Now, I know this isn't a DFS, comment, but it's kind of funny because I think we made Ronnie's job a whole lot harder because he's down by 39. He is cuffed.
Well,
and he has to
his job was hard because he's
Henderson.
down by 39.
Yeah.
I would go with, look, first of all, Cup's going to get you 39 on his own, so don't even worry about it. But personally, I would go with Michelle, but I don't think that's an easy call. I think you could go either way.
Yeah, and for me, I'm somebody that I don't know if I want to play both running backs because I think that Michelle has to see volume. I think that he's going to have to see volume in order for this to pay off, unless they blow out the Seahawks and he sees work in the fourth quarter, where they don't want Henderson to be on the field because he's coming off an injury and they want to try and keep him healthy for the playoffs. That's the only chance that I see where Michelle actually will pay off that, or he gets a couple touchdowns in the goal line, which you brought up as well. So DFS wise, obviously I like. I like volume. I like touchdowns, but I also like to pivot more towards pass catching running backs. And if we go to the other side of things with the Rams, with the Seahawks, we're facing a couple different guys who could actually see volume because the Rams are very similar to the Seahawks, but in a different way. So the Rams will let anybody have volume underneath. Tight ends, slot, receivers, running backs, right? They will let you pass them all freaking day. You're not going to get anything after that. You're going to get whatever, you get. But with the slot corner, Jalen Ramsey ends up playing like a shortstop, right? With nobody on base. He plays behind the baseline at the back end where they can't get a little pop over on you and can't, get to first base, run to second if they hit it up the line or whatever. Like, he's literally a shortstop, and that's what he plays. So as soon as they snap the ball, he comes up and he takes whichever receiver, they plan to go with depending on the zone they run. But he doesn't care about the guy underneath. He'll let that guy underneath go. Meanwhile, their middle linebackers have to play those underneath guys. The safeties come up, try to play those underneath guys. By the time they get there, they're making the tackle, but they're allowing the reception to happen. And typically that goes very, very often to the running back position, once again, to the slot and to the tight end position. So when it comes to the running back position, we have Rashad Penny, who destroyed it over the past couple weeks. Like, he's becoming the new hot thing. Is Rashad Penny somebody that you want to play up against the Rams, who, like I said, they allow teams to get a few yards.
No, I don't want to play Penny. This is like my biggest stand is that I will play no Rashad Penny in any of my lineups. The reason for that being that I think I want to play the running backs that are going to score, that have the most touchdown equity. Seattle, I think, is going to struggle to move the ball in this game. They don't have Tyler Lockett. I think that's a big loss. That basically means that the Rams, who have plenty of people on defense, including Jalen Ramsey, only have to worry about DK Metcalf beating them. If you take away Metcalf, that leaves Russell Wilson with Swain, Eskridge, and Gerald Everett, right? And I think they're more than content to let them do it. Yeah, sure. And Penny Hart, right? So if the Rams are at home, they're favored by a ton of points. And last week, with Penny and with Collins and with Dallas all active, Penny was by far played the most because they won by a million points and they were constantly in positive script. However, if you look at the long down and distance snaps, the 2-minute drill snaps, DJ Dallas played every single one of those snaps. Yeah. So to me, I think that if there's one stand, it's that there's not a lot of viable running backs in the slate. We have 2 for the Rams. We have 1 for the football team. And then we have so many for the Eagles that we might have none. And then you got these 2 for Seattle. And so my stand would be, okay, Gibson's probably going to be in the top 2, but it could be a very meh performance. You could get 10 on Gibson, right? I talked about how I like the Rams backs. I think it's very foreseeable that DJ Dallas could get into the top 3 running backs and could outscore Penny in the spot. And to me, that's like an unowned play that no one will have. I mean, you mentioned how they're willing to give up these little chunks, right? To me, if they're trailing, we saw this in the game against Washington, where they were trailing after the half, and Alex Collins started playing a lot less snaps. They didn't have Penny active in that game, I don't believe, and DJ Dallas started playing a lot more snaps. And now we have this situation without Homer, without Peterson, without Collins. It's only the 2 guys, right? Or What if Rashad Penny gets injured in the first quarter? Now we have one running back, and now you have DJ Dallas playing 100% of the snaps the rest of the way. I mean, there's running backs that get injured less often than Rashad Penny, let me tell you. So I think that's like my biggest stand is on playing a lot of Dallas and playing very little Penny, because I think that if we assume that the Rams get way up, which is I think a pretty fair assumption, then I think Dallas should be projected above Penny in full PPR on that condition. Now, totally, I could be way off. I mean, the Seahawks get up and they play even Steven the entire game, back and forth, then absolutely Penny's going to outscore DJ Dallas. But to me, I'm thinking about these tournaments in terms of, okay, how can I make a couple of assumptions about how these games are going to go and then really maximize that? And to me, if you maximize this assumption of, okay, I think the Rams are going to win, I think they're going to win by a lot, then what that leads me to is, okay, I want to play a lot of Michelle, and I even would consider playing Michelle and Henderson. And then I actually want to play a lot of DJ Dallas because, I mean, I just think that the upside is there even without a Penny injury. And what if you get a Penny injury? And now I'm telling you there's a pass-catching running back at 4K who's going to play every single snap, and he's like 2% owned. I think that's potentially slate-breaking.
So I agree with you 100% on DJ Dallas. I love DJ Dallas in this matchup. I think that he's going to see. I told you, like at the beginning of the show, I want volume. I want volume. I want volume. I don't think the big players are going to be there for any one of these matchups for any one of these teams. Sure, you might have DK Metcalf come down with a random one, but outside of that, like there's not going to be a ton of big plays for either team. So I want as much volume as I could possibly get my hands on. And DJ Dallas should see volume, not just in the rushing game, but in the receiving game. However, I don't want to fade Penny as hard as you do. I still want a few shares of Penny.
Fair.
Because
if I played like 150 lineups, I would absolutely include Penny. Just because I'm only playing 5 lineups, and I'm making this like my stand for the day, by the way. But I'm not saying Penny's a terrible play.
No, I mean, agreed. So when it comes, though, the Rams have struggled on the goal line up against bigger backs, and you might see low yards per carry for the Rams. However, the reality is teams are just running up against them in the goal line because they don't want Jalen Ramsey. They don't want the secondary to pick him off because they're very good in short to go situations in the passing game. They just shut down every single opponent. So opponents are just running the ball so they don't turn the ball over. In fact, let's see, they've allowed 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. I mean, they've allowed 6 or so rushing touchdowns in the past 6 weeks, somewhere around that range. So yeah, it's not something as to where I want to fade Rashad Penny because I think he can get into the end zone in a higher scoring game that we'll see in the other one. But I'm not going to be playing him that often. I think I'll probably have more shares of DJ Dallas than I will of Rashad Penny. As for the passing game, we can talk about DK Metcalf all day. Jalen Ramsey's matched up with them, shatters them, blah, blah, blah. Like, they have their games where he has 70 yards. He has his games where he has 40 yards. I don't think there's really much to talk about in this one with DK Metcalf. Yeah, you should have him in a lot of your rosters, but, I'm not fading him. I'm not locking him into everyone. How do you feel about DK?
He's kind of a floor play almost today, which is weird. It's so hard to envision him not getting a good amount of targets without Lockett. I mean, I can't imagine any of these other guys really demand a lot of targets. But I'm not sure that we're going to see the ceiling. Like, I mean, Metcalf's ceiling plays usually come when he's able to get lined up on single coverage and beat somebody on a double move or something like that. And I mean, how many times are they going to let DK Metcalf get an opportunity in single coverage without safety help over the top, without Lockett there, right? Like, and it's not like the Rams don't have the guys who can cover. I mean, what we've seen Ramsey mostly play the star position, but what if they just decide today, we're going to change the plans? Jalen Ramsey, your job is to go and take DK Metcalf out of the game, and we'll let everybody else deal with these jabronis that the Seahawks have. Like, that could happen. Anything could happen. So I think that Metcalf is a bit, at 6,800. The thing is that he could have a floor game, right? He could have 10 targets, 6 catches, and 62 yards. And depending on how the rest of the game goes, the other game goes, that could end up in the optimal lineup, right? Like, you don't know. So I think Metcalf's a fine play, but I don't think it's hard to talk yourself into situations where he's not one of the top 3 wide receivers on the slate, right? Like, he already projects beneath Cup. And okay, now tell me that Van Jefferson or Odell catches a long touchdown. Okay, now he's probably 3rd, right? Can Smith or can Mclaurin or any of these other guys like Quez Watkins or Dwayne Eskridge or any of these guys get past him? Maybe, right? If they score a touchdown, well, then maybe. So it's not that hard to envision Metcalf out of the top 3. The guy who I probably like most in the Seattle passing game is Gerald Everett, just because if they take Metcalf out, I mean, we kind of saw this against Green Bay where Green Bay really blanketed the deep threats, and Russell Wilson's had to continue to look underneath, and Everett is that underneath safety valve for him. So I like Everett. Probably not in the same lineups that I'll play Dallas, because I think they're kind of occupying similar roles in the offense where we're taking the assumption that Russell Wilson's playing from behind and constantly checking down short. And, who does he check down to? Probably Dallas or Everett. What do you think of these other guys? Do you have a feeling about Swain or about Eskridge?
So I have a feeling about these guys, right? And up until late, the Rams have done very, very good about shutting down slot receivers who run deep routes. Christian Kirk had a great game this past week, but overall, they typically don't allow Christian Kirk to have a good game because Christian Kirk plays this deeper route out of the slot. Meanwhile, you have a guy like Dwayne Eskridge, who plays a very similar role. You just brought up Green Bay. Green Bay played against the Rams back a few weeks ago, and Randall Cobb was forced to the outside on a bunch of routes. However, Randall Cobb doesn't run deep routes, so he's forced to the outside while playing underneath routes. So the safeties, the cornerbacks who play out wide, they typically will back up into cover threes, or they'll play, an edge zone. It allows the outside short yardage receiver to go one-on-one with linebackers. And we've seen it time and time again with Deebo Samuel, for example. Randall Cobb was another one. Laviska Shenault did all right, but, that was somewhat of his role. Meanwhile, sorry, I thought I heard somebody. You heard it, yeah. Raymond Khalif, right? Ended up having, 6 receptions. A few of those were short. He had a couple long bombs, but a few of those were short and underneath. I mean, we just see it time and time again where these wide receivers who get to face linebackers, who get to face safeties underneath, could end up having a massive, massive game up against the Rams. And I think that's Dwayne Eskridge this week. And I'm not a Dwayne Eskridge person. I'm not a fan of him. I never have been. But over the past few weeks, I think it's the past 3 games, Eskridge just ran a third the amount of routes that Swain has run. Yet he's seen, I believe, 2 more receptions. He saw 6 receptions on 8 targets for 50 or 41 yards. Meanwhile,
Swain, he had 335 and a touchdown a couple weeks ago. That was like his breakout game.
Yeah, and Swain has been running routes out the yin-yang. He's been running like 90 routes over the past 3 weeks or so, and he's only put up 50 yards on 90 routes. Like, Swain is not getting targeted. He will not get targeted in this game. This is an Eskridge game, very similar to what you talked about with Gerald Everett. He'll be underneath. He'll see a ton of targets, ton of opportunities. I think the Eskridge is the guy to own as my sneaky play for this week. I do have one more.
I couldn't agree more. And then get to the other one. I agree on Eskridge. We also saw, what I like to see is when someone produces unlimited opportunity and they get more opportunity. And we saw against San Francisco, he had 3 for 35 and a touchdown on just 33% of the snaps. The next week, he outsnaps Freddie Swain for the first time all season. He plays 46% of the snaps against Houston. Swain played 44. Didn't matter. Neither of them did anything. But that's a positive development. And it reminds me
They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to do anything.
And it reminds me of the situation we had with the Chargers 2 weeks ago, where Keenan Allen's on the COVID list, and a lot of people go to Jalen Guyton. Jalen Guyton was already playing all those snaps. He wasn't getting targeted. Now, he happened to catch a long touchdown in that game and save his day. But my point was, no, actually, he's not really getting a role change because he plays this role anyways. He's always running these wind sprint routes and not getting targets. The guy who really gets the role change is Josh Palmer. And sure enough, Palmer out-targeted Guyton in that game 7-3. Now, they scored about the same because, like I said, Guyton happened to catch a 50-yard touchdown. Swain could happen to catch a 50-yard touchdown in this game. But if you're telling me, who I think actually gets a larger benefit from these vacated snaps, it's probably Eskridge. When it comes to this vacated targets idea, I'm always going to bank on the guy who is now getting snaps that they hadn't gotten previously, because maybe they can extrapolate the volume that they've gotten on their snaps versus the guy who's been getting snaps, not drawing volume, and now just might get more volume on those same snaps. I think that's a less likely bet. So I agree on Eskridge.
I love that. I love that take. And, Eskridge is somebody that they could provide you with the touchdown in the short yardage situation if you're fading Rashad Penny and you still want to go with Travis Summer.
Touches, right? He can get a jet sweep on the 2-yard line.
Yeah, and like you talked about, somebody that reminded you of it was Josh Palmer. I mean, Jakeem Grant is another guy who, although he got hurt last night, he took advantage of the opportunity he saw back 2 weeks ago and excelled this past week before he got hurt. So I'm looking at Eskridge as the same sort of player where he could, if you're going with Travis Homer, I think the Eskridge is right there in the same realm of possibilities as Travis Homer. And I'm sorry, not Travis Homer, TJ Dallas. And I wouldn't mind playing them both together.
For what it's worth, by the way, Jay Glazer just said, Darrell Henderson is active, but the Rams love Sony Michel. They will ride with the hot hand. So to me, that sounds like they're going to probably start Sony, I think. They'll probably give Henderson a drive, and then whoever's performing better, ends up taking over the bulk, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right, so I do have one sleeper, right, that we're going to target. We kind of went a little bit out of the realm of what we talked about, on how we're going to approach this slate, but I know we're getting close. So I do want to talk about Kenneth Gainwell real quick.
Oh, yeah.
The Washington football team, right? There's somebody that struggles with the pass catch running back. The Eagles could go up early. This could be an opportunity where we see more chances with Kenny Gainwell to tote the rock, as we call it. And if he gets a couple opportunities in the passing game as well, especially late in the game, we could see him absolutely crush. And there's an underdog bet at 11.5 yards over or under. Now, I know I did reference the fact that we have 4 running backs that are active for the Eagles. At least that's what I saw on RotoWire.
Yeah, we do. Confirmed. Yeah.
Okay, so that is absolutely absurd. But at the same time, we know that Boston Scott is likely to be playing as the special teams back. Jordan Howard is probably going to be playing the goal line back, but that's not going to change any role for Kenneth Gainwell. So, I mean, I'm somebody that's sitting there looking at Kenneth Gainwell as a sneaky play on the back end who could finish as a top 3 running back this week if he sees 1 or 2 big plays.
Yeah, I don't mind the Gainwell play at all. They make him active for a reason, right? Because like you mentioned, Scott plays special teams. So I wouldn't read anything into Scott. I'm treating this as a 3 running back situation. And Scott's going to be there to play special teams and maybe mix in if 1 or 2 other running backs get hurt. Otherwise, I'd be looking at this as Sanders, Howard, Gainwell. And
there's no reason.
Gainwell's right. And Gainwell is the one who, they made him inactive in this same spot 3 weeks ago. So to me, if they didn't plan to use him, they obviously have no issue making him inactive. I think this tells me that they want to use him as their passing situation back, right? And then they'll figure out the split between Sanders and Howard. And of course, I expect Sanders to get most of that on the early downs. So I agree with Gainwell being a decent play. I have no Howard. The Eagles, I don't have Gainwell in any of my 5 lineups, but I think it's fine. The reason why I've gotten on this Dallas thing is just because I'm like, man, that's a lot easier of a situation because it's only 2 guys, right? And this Eagles, that's the thing. It's 4 guys. To me, Sanders is a fade. He's projecting right now to be possibly the 2nd most owned running back on the slate. And I mean, he could presumably lose a touchdown to 4 other runners. He could lose it to these other 3 running backs or Jalen Hurts, right? So to me, Sanders is a really sketchy play at high ownership, always is. And, I see Jordan Howard is popping up, not high owned, but a lot more owned than Gainwell and DJ Dallas. And to me, I wouldn't do that. I mean, could Howard get a touchdown? Absolutely. But to me, at least with Dallas, I'm like, man, okay, here I'm just fading one dude, right? If it's not Penny, then it's Dallas. With Howard, it's like, okay, if it's not Sanders, it could be Gainwell. It could be Scott. It could be Hurts just keeps the ball. I don't want to play Jordan Howard.
There's 5 running backs on the team.
Right? You have to be right about Sanders failing. And then you need more things to go right afterwards. At least with Gainwell, the reason I like Dallas because he has that built-in contingent upside with a Penny potential injury. But Gainwell is the same case, really, for a standalone role, right? Yes. He's the guy where, if they fall behind in the second half, it's not Howard. I mean, they're not throwing the ball to Howard, and maybe they mix in Sanders some, but you can easily see a game situation where Kenny Gainwell gets 5 catches for 50 yards, and he's been used inside the 10 before. So I don't mind the Gainwell call at all.
He has actually getting used inside the red zone a decent amount for, when he actually plays. So I like that. Yeah. I like that point as well. And like I was going to say, there's no reason to activate Sanders if you thought that. There's no reason to activate Gainwell unless you're planning on using them because you already have 3 running backs on that roster. That's absurd. All right, let's get out of here, Jacob, real quick. Tell everybody where they can find you so we can go watch some football.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, @FF_RTDB. You can find me every Wednesday, such as tomorrow night, with Chase and Shane for Fantasy Intervention. And then you can find me on Fridays with the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast with Big Billy FF and @Thomas Tipple And you can find me over on Player Profiler. I just released yesterday my strategy piece for playoff best ball contests, and we'll be coming back with a follow-up with some more player-specific takes on that one. They just released a new playoff best ball contest on Underdog. And you can find me in the Bulletproof Discord as well. Otherwise, hit me up on Twitter. Especially hit me up if you win any money with DJ Dallas tonight. If the more likely outcome happens and DJ Dallas has one catch for 3 yards and a fumble, then don't hit me up. But I that's my last word. DJ Dallas season, praying, and really not because I think he's like some great player or anything, but just because I think that the game theory works out to get him a low ownership. So praying for you, DJ. Make me rich today, buddy.
Love that. You can go check us out over there at youtube.com/fantasy intervention. You guys can find me over there at ff_intervention. Big shout out to Fantasy Football Discussion. Appreciate you guys for joining. We will see you tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. That's right. Tomorrow night at 9 o'clock, we're getting the band back together. Let's go.
Woo, let's do it.